Well, hello, everybody. What a pleasure to be able to talk a little bit about this question of climate anxiety and the intergenerational connection. One, I'm feeling even more powerfully than usual right now because, as some of you know, I have uh, my first grandchild who turned 3 months old the day before yesterday. Um, Now I know someone and love someone who's going to be around in the 22nd century. And it makes that generational aspect of this all the more real. Look, climate anxiety is extremely real. I still feel it, and I've had 35 years to work out my own angst, some of which I've done by transposing it onto other people. Um, and and so I'm very, very glad that people are taking this seriously and figuring out that working through the kind of telescoping lenses of different generations is a key way to do that. As those of us who are nearer the exit than the entrance think about it, it's not perhaps with quite the same kind of panic because we may not be here for the very worst of it, but it is with an extraordinarily strong sense of sorrow um, and a sense that we don't want this to be our legacy. For young people, I know it feels like they're staring down the barrel of a gun because whatever great career they're training for right now, it's all too likely that their actual career may turn out to be emergency response. So we have got to do the intergenerational work of standing up to the forces that are taking us over the cliff. And we've got to figure out how to do it together. And I think I'll just end by saying, I think that is made easier when we have a certain amount of sense of humor and humility about the whole thing. Um, um, Especially since it's those of us of a certain age who've spent our life pouring carbon into the atmosphere, a lot of it before we even knew that was a problem. Um, um, I remember the very first demonstration we did at Third Act when a bunch of young people asked us to come help with some demonstrations at the banks. This was how we got started on a lot of this banks work. And they said, we want to be outside Chase Bank, but we don't have credit cards or checking accounts. You want to help? And we did want to help. And we got there to the march, and there were a couple of hundred high school kids because they understand perfectly what's going on. And they're a little sprier. So they were at the head of the march. But behind them, there was a big gang of us with a banner that said, Fossils Against Fossil Fuels. Um, I think everybody was grateful that it wasn't entirely serious all the time. We do have to live on this planet we're trying to save. And that means figuring out good strategies to break through a little bit of this anxiety. No strategy better than work, but the work gets easier if we're in a place in our heads that works. So many thanks for taking up this challenge and doing this job.
Hi, everyone. My name's Sarah Newman. I'm the Executive Director of the Climate Mental Health Network. It's really an honor to be here with all of you tonight. And I just want to thank my partners in organizing this, Third Act and CoGenerate. Over 700 people registered for tonight's event. And so clearly there is a need for this. And really quickly, we're going to start off with a quick activity using our climate emotions wheel. Duncan's going to share this on the screen. I invite you to just share in the chat, naming any of the emotions that you might be connecting with right now, looking at all of the emotions listed on this wheel that we created in partnership with Panu Pakala based on his research. So I see despair, gratitude, overwhelm, anger, outrage, imagination, empowerment, so many. Thank you. Please keep sharing. This wheel is available for free download on our website, and it's available in 15 languages. I started the Climate Mental Health Network 3 years ago because of my own struggles with climate emotions. And no one should ever feel alone with their climate emotions. This is a normal response to the climate crisis and all of the emotions that people are sharing in the chat. These are all normal and valid. And this is a collective experience of what we're going through and the emotions that we are feeling. We're in this together and we need each other. And the research shows that young people are most impacted and are most deeply experiencing the mental health impacts of climate change. And there was a study in 2021 of 10,000 youth worldwide that found that 75% of the future was frightening because of climate change, and 4 in 10 did not want to have children. And it is our love and for future generations that drives so many of us to do this work. Just next slide, please. There was a study of 60,000 people in 23 countries, and people were 12 times more likely to take action to address the climate crisis because of their love for future generations. 12 times more likely. And just the next slide, please. And just a couple brief thoughts before we go into this conversation. One, young people are not going to save us. We hear that mantra sometimes. It is not up to young people to save us to address the climate crisis. We are all in this together. There are people working across all generations to address the climate crisis, and each of us has a role to play. We each can make a difference working in community across generations together on this. And I'm now going to turn it over to Duncan from CoGenerate to introduce the speakers.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And thank you everyone for being here today. It's so heartening to see so many people part of this conversation. Michelle, could I just ask that you make sure that you're letting people in? I've been doing that, but I want to focus on introducing the speakers here. I just want to briefly introduce myself. As Sarah mentioned, I'm a digital communications specialist with CoGenerate. I'm so passionate about both of these issues, cogenerational collaboration and climate. And it was really the climate movement that got me started in intergenerational collaboration. It was Bill McKibben and 350 that got me interested in divestment, which got me involved in college, which brought me to the Hillary Clinton campaign, where I really learned the value of working across generations. And that leads me here. But that's enough about me. Sorry, I'm still sharing the slide. I want to introduce our 4 incredible panelists today, starting with Heidi Pan. Heidi is a 17-year-old environmental activist from New Jersey. She's the host of the 1.5 Degrees podcast and a climate mental health network Gen Z advisor. So Heidi, I just want to ask you, as a Gen Z youth leader, you're often looked to as a source of stability and optimism, but I'm curious who you talk to about your own climate emotions, and what are your tips for how older generations can talk to young people about climate change? I see you're on mute. You're unable to come off. Okay. Let's come back to you, Heidi, in a second. And maybe we can move over to Sami. Sami Aaron is the founder of the Resilient Activist, an organization dedicated to supporting climate activists and helping create leaders who have the resilience to see us through these unprecedented times. Heidi, I would love if you could share a little bit about why addressing climate emotions is so important and how intergenerational connection can help with that.
There we go. I'm on.
There we go. So let's start with Heidi, and Sami, we'll come back over to you in a second. So Heidi, my question was about your own climate emotions and tips for how older generations can talk to young people about climate.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Both are really great questions. So as to, who the heck I personally talk to, I have the immense privilege of being in a space now where I'm practically surrounded by people who care about our environment and understand the importance of supporting our mental health. Many of them are actually behind or attending this event. Hello. And I also tend to talk to my close friends who just happen to be in the environmental space, or even with total strangers in climate cafes that's also been an option for me. I will say though, I haven't always felt like I had people in my life, because I know my experience is definitely not universal. It took some courage, and honestly, it's still scary sometimes to be vulnerable and be the one to open up that conversation. So I'm constantly today overcoming stigma, misinformation, and it's only then that I've been able to come across or create communities of support for myself. There are also times where I just simply don't have the energy to talk to another human being. Because it's restoring as it is sometimes draining depending on the day. Sometimes when that happens, I also just like write whatever it is that's on my mind on a random piece of paper. I also have my notes app or voice memos. Just like whatever works for you. I know I just have to get my thoughts that can, quickly get cynical and cyclical out of my head somehow. Who else have I mentioned? Oh, I haven't mentioned my family yet. Actually, that could lead into the second question. Because my intergenerational and closely related to that, intercultural conversations about climate or mental health, they remain challenging. And that's completely okay, but that makes them all the more important to me to engage in. I have an acronym, learn, it's on the slide, I believe.
Yeah.
Because we can all learn from each other. Yeah. Let's see what I did there. Um, it goes listen, encourage, amplify, respect, and nurture. So I guess I could go through each one of them in turn. Listening, that seems easy, but it can really make or break because nothing is more discouraging than making yourself vulnerable and then feeling like you aren't being heard. So truly giving each other the opportunity to talk is crucial for making a conversation healthy and continuous. Encourage. Encourage can look like encouraging each other to take next steps. This could look like, hey, I encourage you to reach out to this person or to this organization, or I encourage you to bring your project to life. I can support you in this way. Or even I encourage you to talk to me about this again in the future. Stuff like that, opening doors. Amplify. If you are an adult with a professional network, connect the young person in your life with that and, share their projects with people. The intergenerational team who invited me is amplifying me right now, for example. And likewise, if you are a young person, maybe you're pretty familiar with certain social media platforms, amplify generations that might not be. Respect is pretty self-explanatory. Don't patronize or dismiss anyone. And then this last bit, I kind of want to elaborate on nurture. I included this mainly for those supporting younger generations. Supporting young people does not mean not saying anything at all and putting it all on our shoulders. No matter what, you have a perspective and you can share that. Like I sometimes forget that I'm in my teens when I get all caught up in everything, and my mentors and my parents keep that in check. It's possible to remind us to take care of ourselves and not be discouraging in the same breath. And I think that's about it.
Thank you so much, Heidi. I would love to take this opportunity to move over to Sami, just to talk a little bit more about climate emotions and intergenerational engagement.
Thanks so much, Duncan. This is just such a sweet spot to be in, and I'm grateful to Climate Mental Health and CoGenerate for bringing this to such a wide audience. So the emotional impact that arises from activist work can be insidious, right? Many of us just keep going without noticing our psychological reactions. Clenched teeth, tight gut, shallow breathing, all of these can alert us of our negative emotions when we feel them. But when we activists carry grief, anger, or frustration, it can affect every moment of our lives. Yet when we notice and then tune into them through self-care practices, we can find that resilience builds. So when we live our lives with ongoing stress and grief, we don't even have all of our brain capacity. The brain thinks only about our immediate needs. Yet when we come up from a place of stillness and slower breathing, relaxed muscles, then we have better critical thinking and enhanced ability to find creative solutions and a deeper sense of compassion and community. So when we take care of ourselves, our hearts, we're taking care of those around us and making a more valuable impact on the work we do. Intergenerational engagement can be so valuable for an activist's well-being. Those of us who've been in the climate and social justice arenas for 20, 30, 40 years have been down the paths that many young people are taking today. Situations might have been a little bit different, but for the purpose, the intent, and the heart, as well as the frustration, anger, and fears, those are all the same. In 1968, the Son, My Heart, in that book, spiritual teacher Thich Nhat Hanh wrote, quote, "The best way to take care of the environment is to take care of the environmentalist," unquote. Yet the emotional toll of environmental activism was not part of the conversation until about the last 5 or 10 years. So when we explore gifts like meditation and time spent in nature, or when we reach out for mental health support, whether it's with a therapist or from family and friends or from an older activist, we can learn ways to release the grief and overwhelm. The body relaxes, the breath slows, and then there's clarity. And that's the key, finding the clarity and remembering what we hold dear. Our heart and our souls are in this movement, because when we benefit ourselves, we benefit the earth. And that's it.
Thank you so much, Sami. The next person I want to talk to is Lani Ritter Hall. Lani, you are a leader at Third Act who was motivated to become a climate activist after the loss of your husband of 40 years. You said that that event has been, quote, "my drive to find purpose, hope, and joy as I grow around my grief." And I know I changed up the question a little bit, so I really encourage you to say what's in your heart here, but I am curious how you connect that grief with your purpose around climate and how showing up for young climate activists is a part of that process.
Thank you very much. And thank you so much for the gift of joining all of you in this space. When I lost my beloved Gus, there was a huge hole in my heart, in my life. And my son said to me, "Mom, your purpose for so many years was taking care of Dad. And now you've got so much left to give. You need to find a new purpose." And so I couldn't think of anything more exciting than following up on my years as an educator with younger people, than cultivating intergenerational relationships among climate activists. And I found that in Third Act. And I found that having that purpose, the grief didn't go away. The grief did not shrink. It stayed the same, but it gave me an opportunity to grow around my grief. And so now I have the privilege of being able to say to all of you, just imagine what the possibilities and the potential for change are when youthful innovators bring their gifts of intelligence and enthusiasm and passion to those of us over 60. And Bill mentioned about being fossils against fossil fuels. We also have rocking chair rebellions, okay? And we've had experience. We've learned hard lessons. We've embraced extraordinary grief and joy. And maybe we have just a little bit of wisdom. And the lean on us part is clearly laid out in our working principles that guide our work at Third Act. And you can find it on our website. One of those principles is Back Up Youth. And it's about supporting young people rather than providing any kind of direction. And I will tell you that many Third Actors, many of us yearn to show up for young activists. And at the same time, we recognize this unmistakable tension. Young people say, "Look at the mess you've left us." Okay. And we say, we kind of tried hard to do that defensively. I believe that we have to create a space where we hold both. And we realize that we're deeply and intricately connected, and that we can form deep, meaningful bonds, emotional connections, and work together. And in that space, those of us over 60, we need to be intentional about shifting power, taking on a different role than that in our second act, where many of us were leading in the in front of as we gained structural power, and we need to let that go. And we want to show up for young people, and we want to support them. And we realize that attempts to hold on to that power are going to get in the way of a transition to a better climate and a better country. So we want to listen to learn what younger people are hoping for so that we can be in support of that. And we want to engage in the currency of generosity and connection. And I just happen to think that this work that is so solemn and so hard, that we can find joy in it together if we're intentional about this, and we can grow around our grief.
Wow. Thank you so much, Lani. I'm so grateful to have you here. You speak so beautifully about the importance of this work. And the last person, part of our mini panel here that I want to introduce is Abhay Singh Sachal. Abhay is the founder and executive director of Break the Divide, a nonprofit connecting youth across Canada. Abhay, young people, especially leaders like you, are often told that they're people's hope for the future. I'm sure you've heard that before. I'm sure a lot of folks on this call have heard that before, but at CoGenerate, we have heard from young leaders that those kind of sentiments can lead to folks feeling pressure and even resentment if it's not paired with this sense of shared responsibility and power sharing that Lani was talking about. How can we better support young activists who are carrying so much at such a young age?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's an excellent question. And I think everything that Sami, Heidi, and Lani have said so far really pinpoint that multiple things can be true at the same time. Young people can be frustrated, can be angry, and can really feel that burden of needing to solve the climate crisis. Even when we think of some of the language we use about climate anxiety, the idea that action alone can cure climate anxiety is not the be all and end all. And so, I really want to start this by acknowledging, like, I am joining here today from the city of Regina, Saskatchewan, just north of Montana here in Canada. And I'm joining here from the traditional territory, Treaty 4 lands of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, Nakota, and Métis-Michif nations. These are the indigenous peoples of the land that have been here since time immemorial. And I recognize that because, Duncan, in your question, you raised an interesting point that there is a shared responsibility here between Gen Zers and older generation. Gen Alpha now that's coming up, like, there is a shared intergenerational burden that we all need to take. I personally, in my own journey, recognize my obligations to the land that I'm on. As a settler to Canadian lands that has benefited from being here in Canada, I need to recognize that my benefits have come at the expense of other people, of Indigenous peoples whose land has been taken, whose land and cultures have been attempted to be destroyed and to be removed. And, there's a whole conversation to be had here about the impacts of that on climate knowledge and on environmental knowledge. But when I think about shared responsibility and my own individual responsibilities, that comes from sort of my understanding of my position, my positionality, and the privileges that I reap from being who I am and being in the land that I'm in. I think for older folks, for everyone on this call today, whoever you are, recognizing the space that you hold, the privileges that you have, the positionality that you have, I think starting there and going internal to recognize who you are and where you're coming from is so key in order to better understand what your responsibilities are. Because I think that we have an obligation to act in the areas where we are privileged. We have an obligation to give back, and that shared responsibility where all of us can come together and recognize our unique privileges, responsibilities. That's where it all really happens. So I think to support young activists, really to close this out, not only do young activists need financial, emotional, sort of social supports, as Heidi and other have mentioned so far, but I think a key part of this is approaching these conversations, approaching these interactions with humility, recognizing that things are changing and things are changing fast. And while keeping space for the emotions that might come with that, recognizing that the systems that the young people today are growing up with, they're not working for us. And we need fundamental shifts. And that's okay. I can promise on behalf of all young people here, obviously not, but I can promise that it's so critical for young people to also engage with that humility and for those relationships to be met in a reciprocal manner that is focused on that humility and care for one another.
Wow. Thank you so much, Abhay, and thank you to all four of you. We're gonna have a chance to hear from all of the panelists again, but right now what I want to do is introduce what I think of as kind of the crux of this meeting, which is our opportunity to engage with each other. So we're going to split into breakout rooms here and give you a chance to respond to these 3 questions in conversation with each other. The really important thing is that Sarah just put or is about to put a link to a Google form in the chat. So what we're going to do is when you get into your rooms, just choose one person to be the note taker. And you're going to take notes in that Google form. The other thing about it is that it's going to have these questions in the form so you can remember them and kind of guide the conversation there. You may get to one of these, you may get to all of them, but we really want to use this opportunity for you to engage with each other and think about these questions. Who do you currently talk to about your climate emotions, and who do you want to talk to? What are specific ways that you will connect with people outside your age group to talk about climate emotions? And what resources do you need to better initiate or support these intergenerational conversations and keep them going? And is everyone back from breakout rooms? I think so. So I hope that was really interesting for folks. I'm really curious to see what people were talking about. If you were a note taker, please remember to submit your Google form. Again, it's anonymous, but we're really curious to see what folks were talking about. And along those lines, I would love to reintroduce all of our panelists to get their perspective on something they heard or something interesting that happened in the breakout rooms. And I invite anyone to get started. Was there any of you who was really inspired by something you heard or heard something you hadn't thought about before? So this is just for our panelists, and I'll invite one of you to step up.
Yeah, I'm happy to get this started. Thanks, Duncan, and thanks everyone for participating in these breakout groups. I heard a few really interesting things from my breakout group. One of the things was this idea that for some of our members, they are organizers themselves. They're climate activists. And so being in this space, they're organizing opportunities for other people to talk about climate emotions. And there's a lot of talk about talking about climate emotions, but they in that process don't actually get to talk about their climate emotions themselves. And so I think that's important for all of us to really think about, like, as leaders who want to introduce these conversations, how do we also protect our own well-being and our own sort of resilience through this process and not be burnt out? That was really interesting. The other thing that I heard that was very interesting was this idea of the importance and the ways in which different spiritual and faith communities are involved in these conversations. And so the role that pre-existing social networks, trusted networks that often older folks have, the ways that we can integrate climate and other social justice conversations there. And there was talk about, even if climate change isn't talked about explicitly, we talk about our emotions about intersectional issues. So there's book clubs that exist talking about things like reproductive justice and economic issues, and climate happens to be one of those additional things. So I think that was really insightful, the ways that we can engage climate as one of these issues. And lastly, in reference to the second and third question, we talked about the ways that we can break down silos. And sometimes there are youth-focused events, and there's events for adults, especially at organizations that might focus on youth. And so maybe one of the ways to break those silos is for adult-driven organizations to reach out to youth-run organizations and youth-serving organizations and offer some support, whether that's, again, financial or emotional or social or access to resources, to then aim to break down those silos. And so that's my 2-minute summary. It was a really interesting 12 minutes, and I wish we could have talked for longer.
Absolutely. These breakout rooms are never long enough. But that sounds like there were some really fascinating insights in that room. I'm curious if any of the other panelists have their own observations. I'll also once again invite people, please share in the chat what were your observations from your breakout rooms, anything that you found interesting or want to share. Sami, go ahead.
Yeah, so one of the things was we really got caught up in introductions, and that took a really long time. People want to let people know what they're doing, and I think that's really valid and valuable. I was surprised at the couple of people in our small group who already were doing intergenerational programming. And there was one who is in a retirement community, and they already are doing these intergenerational programs with people from the ages of 12 to 84. And they've had 3 of these meetings talking about climate change. I'm not sure how much of it is on the emotions, because we didn't really talk about that. But I know that that emotional support would be tremendous, just being in those communities and having the opportunity to talk about climate change. There was a group that he mentioned called Generations Over Dinner. I didn't get the link for that, but apparently they have scripts and everything that you can use as facilitators. So I think that's a great resource. And then there was someone who wanted to know how to connect with the apathetic folks and ways to engage them. And so I wish I had a magic wand and an answer for you, but I don't. So anyway, that was it. It was a great group.
Oh, that sounds excellent. And Generations Over Dinner is a partner of ours at CoGenerate, a really fantastic organization. The website is generationsoverdinner.com. Not hard to figure out. I put that in chat. And I'm so glad they came up. Heidi or Lani, I'm curious if you have other observations from your own breakout groups.
I
I
had the
think you need to unmute her.
Go ahead, Lani.
I had the wonderful opportunity to have an intergenerational conversation, being 78. Okay. And it was really, really exciting to meet folks that really have a passion for what can I do. And the suggestions were that they needed to talk to people who could do something because they wanted to be able to act, that this was going to be helpful. And that there was also mention of a book, Living in the Time of Dying, and how we can be with humans when we think about the grief and the anxiety that we hold. Another thought was what we need to do is take action on a personal level, because there's so much we can do then and know that we're doing something and aware of that. And somebody else also offered that I can, with my daughters, I can talk with my daughters. I can talk with my students. I can have these kinds of intergenerational conversations with my students and let them know that there are adults here who care, who aren't going to say, look, you just got to take care of this. It's all on you now. And that they come holding both the grief and the rage, but also the beauty at the same time. And finally, I think that when we talked about the third question, it was seeing other adults taking action and understanding that you could join that organization. You could invite people to a meeting. You could share organizations and resources for people that might not be familiar. But I want to thank the people that were in the breakout room, because I just really, really enjoyed that.
Thank you so much, Lani. And there are so many great resources coming in through chat. I want to remind folks that we'll include that in our follow-up email. So don't feel like you need to be frantically scrambling to write all this down. We'll have the recording as well. So any resources that folks are mentioning right now, you can also go back and check those out. Heidi, I wanted to ask you, what was your breakout room like? Any observations or things that you wanted to share?
My breakout group was amazing. I'm very grateful to have met everyone and yeah, had that conversation. I also wish we could have talked for longer. So I guess like we had some discussion related to how Abhay mentioned earlier, like people who are working in the environmental space, and more specifically in this case, they were working in research. They have a very great understanding of the issues, but the space itself doesn't seem as open to emotional discussion and that more, opportunity for personal connection. And there was also discussion of how like just the general hesitancy to discuss mental health or discuss emotions at all anywhere really, ties into this conversation. We also, on a more personal level, had discussion about how challenging intergenerational conversations outside of our workplace or activism, and more so within our families and immediate, life can be harder. And yeah, no, and I guess like in speaking to that, it's like if the conversations are indeed too hard, it's okay to like step away momentarily. Yeah, because it takes two in order to have a productive conversation. And that willingness to be open to the conversation is key to having that. And I guess like on a last note, there was a desire for more local and in-person resources, because virtual resources are fortunately abound, but it does take everyone, someone waking up to create resources that are more in person. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you so much to all of you, and thank you to everyone on this call for participating in these discussions. And I really hope that we can move this forward with these suggestions, these in-person connections that Heidi was talking about, with the virtual resources we're going to highlight here. Speaking of which, I want to turn things back over to Sarah, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the resources that we've put together in addition to everything that people are contributing right now.
Thanks, Duncan. And just a huge thank you, everyone, for being here tonight, for your participation, for this really important conversation. And I don't think it's going to be the last. And I'm just going to put in the chat, we put together a very brief resources guide about intergenerational conversations that's available for you to download, share, use. It includes resources both from the host organizations, CoGenerate, Climate Mental Health Network, and Third Act, as well as lots of other organizations that we collaborate with and support. And it includes a podcast and research and facilitation guides and kits on how to, talk with kids if you're a parent, lots of different things in there. And so please definitely check it out. And I now have the great pleasure to introduce Harriet Shugarman. And Harriet is commonly known as ClimateMama. She is a friend and a collaborator and a colleague in this important work. And I have learned so much from her and been truly inspired by all of the incredible work that she's done for many, many, many years, particularly as a parent, to engage and inspire and facilitate people across all generations to be climate leaders and climate activists. So I'm going to turn it over to Harriet to lead us in a really special exercise now.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for the kind introduction, and greetings, everyone. I'm so honored to be in this space with you all and to have these special final moments to close out our meeting today. So for the next 4 minutes, I'm going to take you on a guided journey that moves us through time and through our lives, past, present, and future. And in a moment or two, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes if you're so moved to do so. You can stay seated, you can stand up, you can close out your Zoom picture, or simply lower your gaze, or if you like, keep your eyes wide open, whichever you're most comfortable with. I'll be here on the screen, and I'm hoping you'll follow along with my voice and direction, and that this will be something meaningful and a way that we can end our time together today. So standing or sitting, eyes opened or closed, please take a moment and think about someone who was important to you when you were younger. They may be alive today, or they may have passed on. This person may have helped raise you, or they may be somebody who, since you were a young child, helped you grow, literally, or through thought, spirit, or personality. They have helped shape who you have become today, and they have helped you begin to define who you want to be. This person could be a parent, a dear aunt or uncle, a family friend, or a teacher. So take a few moments now to think about them. Now I want you to take a step backwards in time. Your person is beside you. If you're standing up, actually take a step backwards. If you're sitting, let your mind drift backwards. There is now someone else with you and your person. an elder who was important in your community or who stood out in your family history, a great-grandparent, a great uncle or aunt, a dear family friend. You may have known them or maybe not, but they had a place and a space in building your family history or the collective history of your community. Bring these two people who you are thinking about with you as you take 2 steps forward, literally or in your mind's eye. Now, I want you to think about a young person in your life now. It might be your child, your niece or nephew, your grandchild, a memorable student, or if you're Gen Z, it might be a peer, a younger sibling, or perhaps a cousin or a neighbor. You've helped shape this young person's life in some way through stories, shared meals, time spent together. So now we'll take a moment or 2 of silence while you think about this young person. Now with this young person and your ancestors who are still with you, take one more step forward. Now in your mind, as you look to the future, there is a child in front of you. You can't quite make out their features as they are turned slightly away from you, but you know this child. Perhaps they're your grandchild, your neighbor's daughter, your great niece, your student's child. So take one more step forward and you are now standing beside this young person. You've brought your ancestors, your elders, your community with you, and together you surround this person. Beside, in front, behind, wherever needed, you are protecting them. You have helped build up their perseverance. You will not let them falter. They know they are safe and supported. There is an unspoken understanding between you of all the complications this young person faces, the difficulties climate change has brought, the sadness, yet you are standing strong. They are standing strong, knowing that their elders, their community, you did not give up on them. You created opportunities for them that have evolved over time. You helped shape their resiliency as well as their active hope. They have you to lean on. They have the knowledge of where they came from. You are a good ancestor. Now, if you would, please open your eyes if they were closed. You can turn on your screen if you feel able and open to do so. And can we stand together in this moment? We are a community here in this moment. We are standing strong for one another. So thank you all. We will give each other a hand. And I turn it back to you, Duncan, to say the last words.
Thank you so much, Harriet. And thank you to everyone who helped make this call possible. I think I speak for a lot of folks in this room when I say I feel like this could have been 2 or 3 times as long. You know, this is such a prevalent issue, and the power of cogeneration, of building bridges across generations, is so potent. We need more of this, and I really hope this encourages everyone here to take this idea and bring it into your life. This fight against climate change can feel overwhelming, and it's only with each other's support that we're going to be able to do this. I'm just going to ask that as we leave, folks share in the chat one word to express what you're taking away from this conversation. I'm going to play some music as we watch those responses come in, and thank you again for being here.